Well, coming to you from the luxurious BlendKit studios for the last time of 2014, I'm Kelvin Thompson.
And I'm Linda Futch.
And this is indeed the fifth and final session in our series of topical weekly webinars for BlendKit 2014. Here we are wrapping up Week 5, Assurance and Blended Learning, and really the BlendKit 2014 course as a whole. Now, spoiler alert, jumping ahead to housekeeping, messing up Linda's whole agenda, you still have 6 days to complete any assignments you wish, though, so don't get too freaked out. With us today, as previously, making sure that all runs smoothly, is our colleague John Pizzo. Also joining us are our guest panelists, Leslie D'Amato-Cubiet and Trista Merrill, whom I will introduce more formally in a moment. At the end of today's session, we will indeed be sharing a number of important course wrap-up details, so please do stick around for that. You're going to want to know what's happening. Right now, though, let's get right into today's topic with a few short polls on the logistics of assuring quality in the development of your blended learning course. So let's start with the first poll. If you haven't already done so, you can pay attention to each of these polls in turn, and please make your responses. We'll start with this one. What are the biggest potential obstacles to completing your blended learning course? Now, if you have thoughts other than the ones listed, just select Other and then type out those ideas into our chat room right here in Adobe Connect, and we'll take a look at those. The biggest potential obstacles. Looks like, yes, indeed, the great majority is still consistent. Every year we've done this. It's always the leader: time to complete the development of your course. And to some extent, having to involve others, depending on others, is a distant second. But I don't see anybody who doesn't know what to do next. So that's good. So, yep, so I'm looking down at some of the free response comments that you've made. Time. We don't yet have the course that you're going to be developing. Well, that would be a good starting point.
Also getting permission to do a course.
That's also true, depending on your institutional parameters, I guess. Some institutions are more formal about that than others. Well, feel free to continue to respond to these as we move on to other polls, but we are going to move on. So as we contemplate the idea of peer review of your blended course, let's give some attention to a couple of specific issues. For instance, has your institution or your college or your department or whatever your organizational structure is, have you adopted standards to guide blended course evaluation? And hey, if you do use such standards, would you please post something about them in the chat window? Let's see what you guys are saying so far. The great majority, it appears, are saying no, with a few of you saying, I don't really know at all. And a few of you saying yes. So I'm curious to see what some of you will write about that. Elise says no one else is interested in blended learning. Well, you know, hey, you've got that evangelist kind of a role, Elise. You can be out there on the bleeding edge and be a success story and bring others along with you.
Quality matters.
Yes, quality matters. Very popular, many places. For a fee, of course, but a very robust community around the Quality Matters standards and their whole peer review process. Yes. Yep. Okay, let's move on to more of a personal note. Do you have a colleague whom you would be comfortable inviting to review your blended course? Now, if your answer is no, you might reach out right now to some of the colleagues online with you during BlendKit 2014 in order to establish a long-distance collegial relationship for this purpose. So, Elise, I know you're there solo in your organization, but maybe you make a connection and you can share with each other. It's hard to do the face-to-face observation stuff, but you can at least share access to the online components. Maybe even video record face-to-face and share that. You can sometimes have some really good peer-to-peer interaction, even across the miles. So thus far, it does seem like most of you have identified at least one person with whom you could have that kind of collegial trusted relationship, but a few of you indeed do not have that kind of, you don't know anyone that you could do that with right now. So I'd like you to consider reaching out to each other. And if you have some particular obstacles that you see are preventing you having that kind of trusted relationship, comment on those in the chat room, would you? And finally, have you found written criteria for blended course quality that you could adapt for sharing with colleagues that would help you get that real robust peer feedback? And if yes, maybe you could jot a note about those criteria in the chat window. And while those are coming in, I just want to make another little note here and direct your attention to a number of thoughtful blog postings from our community on the topic of quality assurance and blended learning. So do please take a look by perusing our list of BlendKit 2014 bloggers. We'll put that in the chat window as well, but as a reminder, that is bit.ly/BlendKit2014_bloggers, or you can peruse the Twitter stream embedded on the homepage of our course. And you're going to find a lot of very interesting comments and reflections on the whole quality assurance dynamic. Let me just see, get this URL posted in here. Hopefully I did that correctly. Well, no, there's a typo in here. You know, that R should be a T, and then it'll work. So let me just kind of look and see what we found here for this final. A lot of folks do say that you have your eye on criteria for blended course quality, and that you can use that as the basis for your interactions with a trusted colleague. Great. Feel free to keep that conversation going as we transition into our moderated panel this morning. So as we hear from our panelists today, listen for their approaches to addressing concerns about quality, both in design up front, as well as in the actual experience of teaching and learning in their blended courses. And during the presentations, please use the chat window to post any comments or questions which you would like to ask our panelists. If we have time during the session, we'll get to them. Otherwise, we'll try to get those addressed after today's session, as in weeks past. So, with no further ado, please let me introduce to you Dr. Leslie D'Amato-Cubiette from here at UCF and Dr. Trista Merrill from Finger Lakes Community College. Leslie is a very popular instructor of face-to-face, online, and blended courses in nursing, and recently a textbook author. Congratulations, Leslie. And Trista is a professor of English at Finger Lakes Community College and is experienced in teaching blended online and face-to-face courses, specializing in niche topics like Tolkien and Harry Potter, alongside the very important work of teaching English comp. So we're going to start with this first question that we have on screen here. What conflicts have you observed between the ways you determine quality in your blended courses and the way your organization determines quality in blended courses or programs? And Trista, we'll start with you in responding to this first question, and then Leslie will hear from you. Trista?
Hi, everyone, and welcome. It's good to be here today. It's interesting that in this particular question, simply because we are in the process of transitioning from our own Quality Matters rubric to a SUNY-wide one as part of Open SUNY Initiative. My college is located in upstate New York, and so we're part of the large SUNY network. And so one of the things that I've noticed is that one of the biggest conflicts I see is that as the technology changes, we're also transitioning from Angel to Blackboard. As the technology changes and our system changes, the people who have always taught their classes in always exactly the same way are having difficulty transitioning to what we're seeing is a trend to better test the quality and effectiveness of our classes, and to make sure that we're meeting the same learning outcomes as our face-to-face classes and our fully online classes as well. And so that's one thing I've noticed. And I've also noticed that we don't have a tremendously large number of blended courses, so we're using the same quality management that we do for our online courses, and so there's a little bit of translation that needs to be happening there as well. But we have really good support here, so it's always a matter of working with our technology folks to make sure that everybody's on track.
Well, we had some very similar things at the University of Central Florida when we switched from Blackboard to Canvas, and Canvas being a little bit more of an open interface, I would say, and a little bit more, I don't want to say the word, but Facebook-y-like, which is good and bad. The students love it, the faculty hated it. So it was a very unique transition, and with that, faculty felt like quality was being compromised. However, the students felt like quality improved. So sometimes there's just a little disconnect there when transferring over to a new system, so to speak. So again, the faculty had to buy in to quality and what quality is and the definition of quality. And basically, I have stolen from the business models that quality is a part of value. And if the students felt like it was valuable, then they felt like they received quality. So I found that very interesting, and stealing from business models in that respect really kind of worked for me. And when I say stealing, I don't mean stealing. I mean borrowing some of their theories behind learning and how business students learn. And it works for nursing students, it works for accounting, it worked for photography, psychology, and just looking at the value of the courses and what the students felt was of value. And so the conflict was kind of somewhat resolved by having everybody buy into that this blended course was a value for what they were paying for. And so that worked out very nicely, but everybody's got to buy in. That's the key.
Yeah, that's a very good point, as some people in the chat room are noting as well, about factoring in the student perspective and value perception. But Leslie, in your college in particular, if memory serves, historically, nursing pays a lot of attention to quality. You have a lot of standards and you have a lot of criteria from a lot of different standpoints at paying attention to quality. You want to comment on that just for a moment?
Well, we don't like dead people too much, so quality is really important in healthcare, and we are very accustomed to looking at ourselves and evaluating ourselves. Now, with that said, there's a lot of formal tools out there to evaluate this, but as some of you have brought up in the chat area already, is that who is really qualified to evaluate what the quality is in the course when we're all kind of somewhat fumbling in the dark occasionally. Blended courses are tough because we have the online component and then we have the live face-to-face component. And with that, evaluating a peer can be very difficult when the peers we may all have a group think thing going on where the peers may be also embedded and we think it's valuable again, and then the students don't find maybe something that we think is great quite so great. So again, getting that disconnect together is really key in making a blended course work and valuable to the student, where they feel like they've learned something. Sometimes the students will say, well, you didn't teach me anything. And that's really that's tough for an instructor to hear.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that for a second, this criteria thing. That's our second topic here. So Leslie talked a little bit about the various kinds of criteria that her colleagues in UCF's College of Nursing have. And so what goes into some sort of a design or a quality rubric? So one of our question submitters says, well, the BlendKit course provides a rubric, our self-evaluation and peer review form. We'll also leverage that for our portfolio review in the coming weeks. But there's also, of course, as people have mentioned, Quality Matters. Blackboard, the company, also has like this exemplary course project and so forth. And this person notes, they're kind of all similar, but they're quite different as well. So how do you choose what kind of a rubric or set of standards to use? Trista, why don't we hear from you on that?
Well, ours, like I said, we're in the middle of transitioning as part of the Open SUNY process, but prior to that, I had sat on the online advisory board, and it was our quality managed rubric was developed as part of that with our director of online learning and our media and instructional designer working together with faculty and staff, as well as we have an online concierge whose sole purpose at our campus is to aid and assist students with online learning, whether they be blended or fully online. And so our rubric is part of that, but in the process of moving to this Open SUNY, we're going to be adopting what Open SUNY does, because that's where our mandate comes from SUNY. And so it's a matter, for me, what it always boils down to, and for my own personal assessment and evaluation of my courses, is the student learning outcomes. If the way you are judging or assessing or evaluating, or whatever terminology you want to use, whatever you're using to evaluate your course is not based on those student learning outcomes, then there really is no point in doing it, because that is what the course is there for, and that's where we need to be paying attention to what's happening. Are the students meeting the same learning outcomes regardless of the modality by which they are taking the course?
Leslie, any additional comments on criteria like design or quality rubrics and choosing something like that?
Yes, well, that's where it gets interesting as well. And Elise online just chatted that, you could follow all the rubrics and follow all the criteria and have the best, standards set, but still students may be dissatisfied. And that's where a balance is necessary. And the best rubric is your own learning objectives for the course. That is truly the best rubric. Meet those learning objectives and then throw in some of the fluff, if you will, or the fun stuff that students really gravitate towards. So take your learning objectives, almost make them into a rubric for evaluating your blended course. Meet those, and then on top of that, strike a balance. And again, with that said, as Elise was saying, and I feel your pain here, let me tell you, I have a lot of non-traditional students in my course, or as I like to call them, more seasoned learners. I hate that older word. Oh. But anyway, I like to call them my seasoned learners, and they tend to fight learning more than accept it. Getting your seasoned learners to not fight it and to go with it is half the battle. So maybe with your next course, if you have a lot of seasoned learners, maybe the best way is to get them not to fight it. Now, stimulation is difficult, though. With a seasoned learner, they are going to try to continue to fight it. But striking that balance is key. Meeting your learning objectives, and your seasoned learners will be the ones who will be sitting there making sure that you met every learning objective you had for your course. With them, I find breaking it down and stating up front, here is learning objective 1. We are meeting it with this. They tend to like that. They really do need it. I know it's spoon feeding, but they really almost need to see it, and then you can have the fun stuff after that. But that works for me. And when it comes time to evaluate the course, I have a peer reviewer who comes in and says, wow, you really covered this, but you also covered X, Y, and Z as well. And so that works out really nicely. Gets a lot of things done in a very short period of time.
Thanks for that. Well, we've been talking about this a little bit, but let's focus in, zoom in explicitly on this whole idea of student evaluation. So what role do you see student evaluation playing in the evaluation of teaching effectiveness and course quality? And I guess I will add to that, how do you solicit that student feedback? Of course, most of us have end-of-term evaluations. I mean, do you leave it at that, or do you cultivate other mechanisms for student feedback as well? And how does that student feedback play into these other kind of criteria that we've been discussing? Trista, let's start with you.
Well, thankfully, I'm in a position where I am no longer required to do the college-wide evaluations that are part of the tenure process and the promotion process at our college. And not to summarily dismiss them, but they're not always designed to find the information that I would like to find out. Because I think student evaluation can be extremely useful if it's authentic assessment, if it's asking things that you really want to know. Because students have a far better sense of how things are from their end than we will ever have as instructors or even as outside peers looking in. But we also have to take into account the student who has an axe to grind, has taken on too much, or is simply not well suited to the blended modality. As a faculty, like I said, as a faculty member, doesn't have to do the evaluations, you know, the filling in the little Scantron bubbles and so forth. I'm free to design my own evaluations, and that's what makes it so powerful for me. I usually know what's not going well, and so a lot of times what I want to hear is what is going well, and to hear from the student's perspective. So I have journal prompts that ask them what they think about where they are in the class, and that sort of thing. The most common hybrid blended course I've been teaching lately is an accelerated composition course. So it's 8 weeks of Comp 1 and then 8 weeks of Comp 2. So not only is it blended, but it's also accelerated. And most of the students don't even know that that's what kind of course they're in on day 1. So you can imagine how it's a little bit of a shock for them. But like I said, I have journal prompts along the way that say, you know, take a step back and look at where you are now and what you need to do and what's going well. I also do end of semester reflective questionnaires or response papers that's framed around the students' experiences and where they are and what they would do differently if they had to take the whole course over again. And I've learned that, and I also, of course, with my blended courses, do online discussions. And I've learned that students will often be very honest about what they're experiencing. And depending on how you phrase the questions, they will often be very honest with the assessment, not only of the class, but of their own behavior in it, which kind of mitigates the concerns about the student who's just overstressed and is taking it out on the instructor or the course, because you have to listen to the students, but you also have to do that with some measure of a grain of salt. For instance, that recently I've been getting the impression that I have a lot of work in some of my classes, but students are also talking about the level of work by talking about how they failed to manage their time or they didn't expect to have so much work. And what that does is allow me to sort of step back and think about my course in a way that doesn't feel personal, but still feels like I can get some quality responses from my students because they're the ones living it. It always makes sense, and I always think this every time, is that my course makes perfect sense on paper and perfect sense in the digital world, but as soon as I, put it out in the wild, so to speak, it doesn't always pan out the way that we want it to. So listening to the students is very, very important, but you have to know what it is that you want to know from them, and you have to find ways to gather that information honestly and as objectively as you can.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I was just reading, Sandy brought up some really good points here as I was looking through them, is that some evaluations and people are not gearing the evaluations towards making the course better. They just basically want to dot the I's and cross the T's. Yes, we did an evaluation kind of thing. And, I agree with Trista in that it's nice. I also have a lot of liberty to make my own evaluations and decide how the course is going and then make changes according to that, which is really important to me as an instructor. And again, why I love working at UCF, plug for UCF there, go Knights. But seriously though, evaluating effectiveness of teaching, I find it very difficult to evaluate peers. I have noticed that when I was doing most of the work for the students, my evaluations were not as positive as they could have been. When I started giving them the work to do, and with less work on me, it seems that the evaluations got better. And that includes everything from when they submit papers, have them submit the paper early and have them do peer reviews on each other. Throwing it back at them really seemed to help my evaluations when they had to evaluate each other. It's tough, and they sure didn't like it when a peer would step forward and really criticize their work. Then they knew kind of how it felt. So I hate to say it, but using the empathy factor a little bit did seem to help overall. Maybe it's a nursing thing.
That's a very interesting point. As we're nearing our allotted time here, let's turn our attention to our one last question here from a little bit of a different angle. So from this angle, we've been talking about kind of what what you do as an instructor to gauge quality, and what do you do with student evaluations, and reaching out to a peer to get some input and so forth. But let's kind of switch gears, flip it around a little bit. So this submitter says course evaluations can be tricky, especially when an instructor is deeply invested in the development of their course. So here we're looking at the standpoint of if you are, let's say, an instructional technologist or an instructional designer who's trying to help teaching faculty bring up, let's say, the quality of their course. This person, I'm taking this as, hey, I'm going to offer a course evaluation, but that can be tricky because if that instructor is deeply invested, how do I provide constructive criticism without being offensive? And do review guides help in this regard? Like, there's established criteria and so forth. And Leslie, why don't we start with you, and then we'll let Trista have the last word.
Okay, and that's a really good point. Is how do you provide feedback to the students without them, getting upset, or how they give it back to you? How it has to go both ways. I think that especially after the first assignments or doing a course or something like that, I try to lead by example, and instead of tear down, it's more of a, well, perhaps next time do it this way, try this instead. Or I'll say, if I were submitting this to a journal, for instance, they have to do a lot of writing in my one particular course. If I had to submit this to a journal, the journal would probably say X, Y, this, and that, so forth, and so on, and yada, yada. So I try to lead by example. And also, especially when I'm doing evaluations, I do put an addendum at the top of my evaluations that constructive criticism is preferred, as far as, if you have anything you want to say about the course. And again, the empathy factor. I would never treat somebody that way. Please don't do the same. Please don't do it to me as well. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's hard. I've had some, early on, I had some feedback that was that my husband would look at me and say, "Were you crying?" I said, "No, I had something in my eye." But it was tough at first, and it was really learned by trial and error. And now I've got it, and I always share with my colleagues as well, especially the newer ones. Sometimes, you've got colleagues too that have to. Some will learn the easy way, and some will learn the hard way. And they'll listen. They'll come back later if they're the hard way type. They'll come back later and say, maybe that wasn't such a bad idea what you said. But basically, I give it the way I would like to get it back if they have something to say.
Trista, what about you? So if you're going to open yourself up to evaluative comments or review for somebody else, what advice would you give to that kind of person to be less offensive?
I love the loaded way, to be less offensive. Like I said, we have a really good support system here, and our MID and our Director of Online Learning are always very, very positive, and they seem to be very sensitive to how much we have invested. That for educators, it's quite often far more than just a job. We emotionally invest in every part of what we do, and every failed student is painful. It's heartbreaking, and to realize that it may be something that we are doing that is causing an increase in that failure is very hard to hear. And I tend to be very emotionally invested in what I'm doing, and very attached to my courses and my students and wanting to do well. And the learning curve for making a successful hybrid or blended course can be quite steep. And so I think what's important, and as far as receiving feedback, I think it's very important for the person who is providing that feedback to do it as if we were on the same team, because really we are. We're all about trying to help the student succeed. And so I think it's very important that there's a rubric involved that can be used, and that whoever's doing the assessment work with the faculty rather than just dictating or reporting you are doing this wrong. Some of my most positive feedback has been less me feeling like I'm doing this wrong and more feeling like, how can we get the technology and the modality of the course to make this better, to help students be better learners and to be stronger learners. And so you go in with a how can we do this, and then it feels far more of an attack and far less critical, because faculty are always concerned about how their courses are going to be It's the big problem with assessment of regardless at what level you are doing that assessment is faculty cannot feel as if they are personally being attacked, and they really shouldn't be. I mean, we all make mistakes, we all make errors. I still do it. I probably will always do it. But what's important is being aware of it, being open to hearing it, and I think a lot of that has to do with approach. It needs to be approached with a level of respect and a level of teamwork and a level of problem solving that makes the faculty feel less attacked and more like, okay, I can make this better, and here's some people who want to help me. And I think that's key. You need to be working together because we really all are on the same team.
That's an excellent summation, Trista. Thank you so much for that. And that does close out today's guest panel. Now, if you have any other questions, go ahead and type them in the chat room. And if you're joining us, I think I neglected to say this earlier, if you are joining us asynchronously, if you're watching the recording of this, we do want to hear from you as well. You'll notice in the web links pod down at the bottom of the screen, you can click that viewing the recording session, access polls and comments here. And you can go ahead and you can type in there even a question or a comment for Leslie and Trista. And so we'll compile those and get those out to Trista and Leslie and try to get some comments back to everybody, and we'll post those on the recordings page. So with no further ado, I had promised you this earlier, there are a lot of logistical details to talk about here as we wrap up BlendKit 2014. So bear with us for another couple of minutes, if you will. We'll go into special double overtime here. And Linda, take us home, would you please?
Okay, first of all, we have an opportunity for you. ELI is going to have a webinar on blended learning in liberal arts college settings. It's going to be June 2nd. There's some links here on the screen to help you get there. It is free for anybody who happens to be an ELI member.
And that's the EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative, right? ELI.
Right, EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative. Okay, next, the following week up to the 2nd, June 2nd, is going to be a catch-up week. The assignments will close on June 2nd at 11:59 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. So translate that to your time zone, but the assignments will close then. Up until then, continue to submit any assignments to get your badges. The ELI certificate, I just want to give you a brief update on how that's going to work. You can start, if you haven't already done so, please submit your portfolios now. Be sure that you go in and register for the certificate and make your payments. Kelvin and I will be reviewing the materials and making comments and sending them back by the 16th of June. So if you want to take an opportunity to make changes, you can then resubmit your portfolio for further review. And it has to be submitted by June 23rd. And then on the 30th of the month, Kelvin and I will be sending a list to EDUCAUSE.
So it doesn't have to be perfect Monday.
That's true. Get something in and we'll give you feedback and then you can update it.
Although as thorough as possible would be welcome. But if you're choosing between not submitting something that's not perfect or submitting, then we'd rather see it, right? So
yes, please do submit it. I've gotten quite a few questions about how long can I see this material? Is it going to go away? The Canvas course will go away towards the beginning of July. Up to then, after June 2nd, you can click around and look at the material. However, the BlendKit material is always out there in the public view, and you have the bit.ly/BlendKit URL. You can always go out and see that information. It is under Creative Commons license. So if you are interested in using that material, please let us know. Kelvin and I will continue to be available for questions, and there will be a PowerPoint at the end that will have our contact information. I did mention that the BlendKit materials are Creative Commons license. They're open to anyone to use them. We'll be happy to discuss with you if you'd like to use it. Please feel free to use those. That's what they're out there for. If you haven't filled out the feedback form, please go back into the course to the end of Module 5 and fill it out. But also, we have a final evaluation form that will probably be going out next week. We'll be sending it to everybody. If you've even just been hanging out in here lurking, please fill out the form for us, because it really gives us a lot of information about how this course is used.
We've been talking about quality, right? That your input makes a difference for us.
That's correct. We'd have thanks to our special guest, and you're going to see some pictures showing up here shortly. of all of our guest speakers. We'd like to say thank you to them. In particular, we'd like to say thank you to both Leslie and Trista for being our guest speakers this week, and also to John Pizzo for being our background helper here. Thanks to all of our guests. And we'd like to wish you all the best as you pursue your development and teaching of high-quality blended learning courses. Going back to the PowerPoints here so that you can see our contact information. So please feel free to contact us. Have a great week, and we look forward to seeing your portfolios.